This is a space where you can bring all of who you are. This is one of the promises of our faith tradition. All of who you are is welcome in our co-created and shared sacred space. It is good to be together. We will begin our service with shared ritual with lighting our chalice. This is of our Unitarian Universalist tradition. Our words by Reverend Scott Taylor. Light we now kindle, and the time we now share, anchor us to that inner flame, that sacred center. That sacred center helps us remember who we were, to clear the way for those and lead us back home. 23, Spirit of Life.
You can be seated. And now it's time for the message for all ages. So if all the children and those young at heart can come on forward. Allergies being weird. Go ahead and sit down. I'll be right there. Well, you're going to love to know that this computer froze, so that's our problem here. Yeah, which in this computer is really slow to start up again. So. I might have to do it without pictures, yeah. But I can show the kids. They can see it.
All the more reason to come.
We'll see. Maybe it'll show up. Anyway, so the story, although I'm on my iPad, which means, and it's by Tom Percival. Perfectly normal until one day. He grew a pair. They're really kind of beautiful. Growing taller. He had imagined growing a beard someday, but he had never imagined growing a pair of wings. Still, that's what he had now. So he decided to test them right away. Soon, Norman was swooping around and generally having the most fun ever. But then, let's see. He had to go in for dinner. You see, Norman had always been so normal, he didn't know how his parents would feel about his extraordinary wings. As he went in, Norman covered himself up in a great big coat. So he's going to hide his wings under his winter coat because he's afraid that his parents will see his wings and they won't like it. Because he's perfectly Norman, who's normal. His parents didn't notice the wings, but they did think it was odd that he was wearing a coat inside. Bath time was problematic. So was bedtime. The coat was hot and uncomfortable, but Norman had decided that no one should see his wings ever. Look, he's even got his hood up on his coat. On his winter coat, he's got his hood up and it's got fur around the edges.
It's cold.
Even though he's in the house.
Even
Even a bath with it on, yes. The next day, Norman went to the park, but it was far too hot to play any of his favorite games. And so it went on. So every day he's going to wear his coat. He went to the park. It's hot because it's summer and he's got his winter coat on, covering his wings. It's the orange thing on the desktop there, Mark. Okay, yeah, well, that one's slow. So long car journeys were unbearable. Can you imagine in the summer being in your winter coat in the car? The swimming pool was dreadful. And that was nothing compared to his friend's birthday party.
Oh, no.
He's never going to take his coat off, it sounds like. Yeah.
No.
They have a jumpy castle there, and he's not in the jumpy castle because that would be really hot. The only time that Norman could feel normal now was when it was rained, because then he had his coat on. And he felt normal if it rained. Or snowed, yep. Yep. Then he felt normal. One day, a boy tried to pull his coat off. And Norman had to run away, hot-faced, angry, and sad. He wished he'd never grown those stupid wings. Then he saw some birds high up in the sky and remembered the joy of the first time he flew. It occurred to Norman that it was the coat that was making him miserable, not the wings. Think he's going to take off his coat now? Why don't you take that scruffy old thing off, suggested his mom and dad. Norman looked up at them hesitantly. His parents smiled and nodded. Norman smiled back. Parents were like, okay, he's being weird. He's wearing a coat, it's fine. Then he threw off the coat and let his wonderful wings fan out. Look, he's showing his parents his wonderful wings. He has beautiful rainbow wings, doesn't he? Shimmering rainbow wings. Norman leapt into the air. Finally, he was free of that coat. He noticed a few other children wearing thick, heavy coats on their own. They looked up at Norman and they looked around at one another nervously. There was a moment's pause, and then, why do you think all those other kids are wearing coats?
They have wings too.
You think they have wings? You think they have wings too? Whoosh! The sky was filled with flying people. Norman had never felt so happy. He's normal again, yeah. He was normal all along, wasn't he?
They all had wings in the first place?
They all had wings, yeah. And he realized that there was no such thing as perfectly normal, but he was perfectly Norman, which was just as it should be. He's playing fetch with his dog with his wings on. Perfectly Norman. Each of you is perfectly who you are. Okay, so now it's time for the children's blessing.
All right, guys, I'm going to lead the blessing today, so everyone come on over here and look at me.
Abby's going to lead it, so wait for Abby.
Guys, go all line up here. We got a whole bunch of you today, so line up the whole front. Show everybody your wonderful faces.
And we're going to walk out, all of you, we're going to walk out this way because the computer's right there. Okay? So when Abby's done, we're going to walk with me.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
We are blessed. We are blessed by being. We are blessed by being here. We are blessed by being here together. All right, everyone this way.
Part of what we do here is we share our gifts. One of the ways we give to the life of this congregation is through our monetary offering. Each month we partner with a local organization and share the money that we gather. This is our last Sunday with our fabulous partner, the Choral Arts Society, who is making Racine an even more musical place. Thank you for all of the ways you give to the life of our church, you give to the life of our city, you give to the life of our world. I love from our message for all ages that there is no perfectly normal. There is perfectly Norman. And each of us, perfect as who we are and who we are called to be, part of being in community is sharing our lives with one another, sharing our joys and our sorrows. If you are part of our online church community, you are welcome to send me your joys and sorrows to be shared out loud on Sunday mornings. I remind us all that as we go into this time of sharing, that we are online, that we are on YouTube, and our invitation is to practice sharing our lives, sharing our own joys, our own sorrows. So in just a moment, we will open up in prayer, and you will be invited to say your name, to share your joy or sorrow out loud. Will you join me? Spirit of prayer, spirit of meditation. After we share, we will sing to one another, "There is a love holding you." This is our opportunity to say thank you for sharing your life, to have our prayer back to you. Join me, Spirit of life, God of love, it is good. It is good to be together. May we begin in gratitude. Gratitude for this life which is ours and a precious mystery. For love ever renewing in our world. I invite you now, if you have a joy or if you have a sorrow, to please raise your hand and we will share them now.
I'm Jody Spencer, and I want to share a joy that our son and his wife came back last weekend to share that they're expecting. September 1st is about the due date, but many of you know my son William Cody Spencer, so I want to share that with you.
There is a love holding you.
Hi, I am Kayla Matt. Sorry, my voice is still recovering from something a week ago. We had a sorrow last week. Our cat, Katie, passed away. She was 20 years old, so she had a very long life, but she came and lived with us for the past year. She was my grandmother's cat who passed away this summer that many of you knew too. So just, we're really glad we had her for a year, but also really sad.
There is a love holding you.
I don't like doing
I am sorry Jimmy Carter is leaving us.
Hi, Kathy here. Yesterday we had the wonderful opportunity to go to Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design and see the Art Against the Odds. There's a book for the church and a book for the eighth principle. I really strongly would love to have this passed throughout the whole church, because besides having the docent talk to us, there are little snippets from the artists in here that we did not hear about. And some of their stories, you can see that they've changed and they're serving life sentences, having been incarcerated at 17. So it's heartbreaking.
There is a love holding you.
Good morning, my name is Trisha Lewis, and I just wanted to share that today is me and my husband Tim's 11th wedding anniversary. Over multiple states and multiple kids and multiple jobs and multiple grandkids. It's been stronger than ever this year, so thank you.
There is a love holding you. And we light one final candle for all of the joys, all of the sorrows that remain on our hearts, on the hearts of our beloveds this morning. I invite you to join in singing our sung response, "There is a love holding me, there is a love holding us."
There is a love
We are delighted to share reflections from our members. Jeff Siuta will share with us. We'll have some music, and then Addison Tower will be sharing.
Obviously set for Addison. So back at the beginning of January, Reverend Danielle and I crossed paths at Wilson's Coffee Shop in West Racine. It was then that she asked me if I'd be willing to give a short reflection about what I considered to be my center. Now, I've pretty much known me all of my life, so I had a pretty good idea of where I would go with this topic. I knew what I was like, what I didn't like, so I figured my center was obvious. A few days later, she emailed me some suggestions on what I might want to add to the reflection. How did I discover my center? Does it change? Has it been challenged? Have I ever lost sight of my center, and how did I get it back? Thus began my journey to the center of myself. It turned out to be a more introspective and revealing task than I had anticipated when I agreed to it. In the weeks between being asked and today, Reverend Danielle has preached a great deal about love being at the root, the foundation of who we are. This is what Frank Zappa would have called the crux of the biscuit, the point where it all begins. Given that, I looked for how that generalized foundation of love was expressed in my own day-to-day life. That, I feel, was where I would find my center. Now, a moment ago, I noted that I knew what I was like and what I did. But that wasn't really my actual center, as much as it was the expression of what was at my center. I needed to name that connection, my center. In thinking about it in a more focused way than I ever have, I identified my center as optimism. I know that sounds simple, and I saw a few eyes rolling. I may even have heard a few eyes rolling when I said that. But when I mentioned that that's my center, bear with me, please. It's not as simple as you think. For me, and of course, I can only speak for me, my optimistic center is not rooted in faith, but in belief. Mine is not the optimism of one who simply hopes and prays for better things to happen to them and to others in the world, and has faith that it'll just happen. Rather, I feel my core optimism helps me to believe that I have the ability to make things happen for myself, for others, and for the world. And that belief moves me to work to make it happen. I think about Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., a man of faith who did not rely on faith alone, but believed in action to effect change and spread love. Not a bad role model. I understand I'm just one small person doing small things in a small way to make this a better world. In delving into the origins of my innate optimism, I had to consider that age-old question of nature versus nurture. I'm sure that in some of what I see as my optimistic center is just the way that I'm made, biochemically optimistic, if you will. But I think a very significant part of the story has to do with nurture. My grandparents were immigrants, 2 from Poland, 2 from Italy, and were optimistic that they could and would have a better life. I think my optimistic nature, my center, has its roots in my grandparents and my parents. All optimists, but all each in their own way. Here's an illustration. In 1960, my dad's father passed away. At the funeral, my dad told me the story of my grandpa's butcher business during the Depression. He and 3 other Polish butchers served the Polish community, but only my grandpa would extend credit to those who couldn't pay. He would write their name and what they owed in his ledger and ask them to pay what they could when things got better for them. He believed that no one should have to go hungry, and he believed that they would someday repay what they owed. Indeed, many did. The other 3 butchers would never extend credit to anybody. Malecki, Shalangowski, and Wardynski went on to become the kielbasa kings of Buffalo. But Joe Siuta went out of business. A great many people came to my grandpa's funeral, and my dad remarked that many came to pay the respects to him for helping them in a time of need, and many came to make sure that he was dead because they still owed him money. Maybe Grandpa wasn't a good businessman, but he was a very good man. My dad was certainly my grandpa's son in so many respects. He too believed that he could and should make this world just a little better in any small way he could. He's been gone for 40 years now. But it's the rare day that I don't hear his voice in my head, see his hands move in mine, and so on. Now, when it comes to my expression of the optimism at my center, it's a mixed bag. I can and have been that annoying guy who, in the midst of chaos and minor disaster, will say, well, you know, it could be worse. Or who invariably, unflinchingly, finds the silver lining in the darkest cloud. It drives some people nuts, but occasionally changes a perspective or two. Less superficially, my optimism has been the driving force in my working life. It's hard to be a teacher, particularly a special ed teacher, if you don't absolutely believe that what you do is helping people to make a better world. It's been my observation that the unspoken optimism of teachers is infectious. Students can catch it. Even some jaded colleagues can catch it, though not as easily. In my retirement, I believe that I still can make a better world. And I have something in the way of skills or experience and ideally some sort of accumulated wisdom to offer. That's not surprisingly a really UU perspective. And it's kind of what drove me to this church 30 years ago. Finally, what happens when life gets dark and complicated? How can I retain and express that optimism that is so much a part of my center? There have been dark times in my life, some really, really dark ones, but they haven't extinguished that light of optimism. I've learned to find another perspective other than wandering in that darkness. There's always a way out. Let me share a revelation with you. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, my dad was teaching me basic carpentry skills. In teaching me to measure, he said to look at that number on the ruler, then close your eyes and count to 3, and open your eyes again and see if it's the same number you thought it was. Over the years, I saw my dad use that long blink when he was confronted with a situation that was not good, sometimes bordering on terrible. He used it to shift his perspective, to see if he could find the positive or the solution to the problem at hand when he opened his eyes. He never articulated that, but it was part of the life that I saw growing up, and something that is part of my being now. And I hope that it's part of my children and my grandchildren as well. Well, that's my story. Thank you for your time, for your indulgence, and I hope that what I've had to offer is of some value to you. And if not, consider having a long blink and examining your perspective as I head to my seat. Thank you.
Let's hope I'm not infected with the tech problems here. So Reverend Danielle also asked me to reflect on what it means to live from your center. And to illustrate this, I'm going to use 2 examples, one where I do live from my center and one where I could have failed to. Saturday morning, I got a text from a coworker asking if I had seen the email from the office manager. Did you see the email from Roy? Never a good way to start a Saturday. I work for the government. We don't usually work on Saturday. I work for the Federal Aviation Administration, And my job is certifying aircraft designs, certifying that they're safe. I work with various aircraft manufacturers in that job, and I get to know their engineering staffs. And I found out that an engineer from one of those companies was killed in a plane crash on Friday. This was a man I had worked with quite a bit and respected as a vigorous advocate of the company's designs. That's a nice way of saying he argued with us a lot, but I didn't know him well enough to know if he had a family. My first thoughts went there. Does he have a wife? Does he have kids? And I didn't know. My thoughts then went to his coworkers, those left still alive, having to deal with this loss. Many aviation organizations, my own in the FAA included, have a critical incident response program where trained peer support volunteers can talk to people who have experienced a loss and be there for them and help them through that process. So I spent a few hours yesterday calling managers in my organization and suggesting that we reach out to the company and offer our peer support volunteers if they needed them. As I was going through this process, a stray neuron fired and whispered to me, "Hey, look at you living from your center. You could talk about this at church tomorrow." The advantages of leaving things till the last minute. I realized that my own job was asking me to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of the people who worked at that company, and that the interdependent web of existence was moving me to reach out to them to offer help and support. Everything I do at my job is intended to make the world a safer place for people, and that feels pretty good. So let's rewind 32 years, shortly after I grew my wings, like Norman, back when my job in the U.S. Air Force was a co-pilot on a B-52 bomber. And I had just gotten certified to fly missions under the Single Integrated Operations Plan, which was the nuclear response to an attack from the Soviet Union. This was 1991, and the Iron Curtain was fraying and the Berlin Wall was coming down, but the Soviet threat was not discounted, and we still had trained crews at 12 B-52 bases ready to respond if Soviet missiles were launched. I was trained to fly over another country and drop neutron bombs on them. I didn't think I ever really thought too hard, or I don't think I ever really thought too hard about how doing that fit into the beliefs that I had been taught in this very church during my childhood. I held on to the belief at my center that if we were ever called to execute that mission, it would only be in response to an attack by the other side, by the bad guys. I knew deep down in my center that even though some of those Soviet missiles would probably be aimed at the base I just took off from, where my new young wife and the families of the other crew members on those airplanes would be vaporized instantly, despite that, it didn't make it right for us to kill 1 million innocent people. And at my center, I do understand the twisted logic that the mere fact that we were ready to go do that, to kill them in the millions if they decided to kill us in the millions, that fact should be enough to deter them from ever doing it. It was called mutually assured destruction, and I still wonder if the person who coined that term meant for the acronym to spell MAD. But I'm thankful that it has worked so far. And I often wonder, there were 3 people on that airplane who all had to throw a consent switch to allow the bombs to come out. And if we had ever been called to execute that mission, would all those trios on all those airplanes have been able to throw those switches and kill all those people? I'm glad we never had to find out.
Thank you, Jeff and Addison, for sharing. I gave myself the same assignment. If I was to do a short reflection about my center, what would it be? I believe my wife is a witch. The story began on social media. I believe my wife is a witch because she takes a magic wand in each hand, mutters what must be spells, and often curses under her breath. And when she is finished, she has a blanket. The only way to explain how she turned that yarn into a blanket is by magic. I don't, but I know many of you do know the techniques and the patterns and the rhythm it takes to turn yarn into a blanket or hats or socks or a pillow or a tiny little Olympia Brown doll. The yarn, perhaps it's neatly organized in its skein. Is that the word? Skein. 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 Oh, I should have practiced. Skein. The thing, when it's rolled up, the thing, whatever, you know what I mean, the thing. Or perhaps it's in a pile on the floor, right? Perhaps the yarn is in a pile on the floor. The thread is there. The yarn is there. Meaning and purpose yet to be decided. So we have our yarn, right? And this question, what is one thing you will take away from our time together? If you've done a class with me, or if we've had an intentional conversation, and I believe that social justice and eighth principle ask the same question, what is one thing you're taking away from our time together? Right? Perhaps it is reflection or friendship or care. What is that one feeling you hope to leave with? Back in October at family camp, we did my favorite ritual, and it's common in youth spaces to do this, and someday we're gonna do it on a Sunday morning. We invited everyone, it was at the end of the worship service, we invited everyone to get into a big circle, and we had our yarn, and we said, what is something you're taking away from your time at family camp? So we took our yarn. As we answered, we wrapped the yarn around our wrist. I am taking friendship away from family camp. And then we took that yarn and we threw it across the circle. Somebody else caught it, said, I am taking joy away from family camp. They wrapped it around their wrist and they threw it across, and they threw it across, and they threw it across. Do you know what we were making? A web. The interdependent web of existence. So by the time we finished, everyone in the circle was connected by this yarn. Making physical, making real, that what we talk about every single Sunday. That interdependent web of existence. If one person pulled on that web, we all felt it. That's the practice we hope for, that when something happens to one of us, we all feel it a little bit. It was William Stafford who wrote, there's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. It's hard sometimes for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Don't ever let go of that thread. I believe in that thread. I believe that when I'm listening for it, when I'm paying attention, I can feel it. That it can guide how to move into the next moment. My mother calls this trusting your gut. Maybe we've heard it said that way. You trust your gut to tell you which direction to go next, what to say or not say, what to do or not do. When I was a chaplain, spent a summer as a hospital chaplain. It's part of our formation. I was doing a 24-hour shift, and it was nighttime at the hospital, which was my favorite time to be there. Lives are still saved and still lost at night, but there is this sense of quiet. Visitors, for the most part, have left. Everyone is invited to rest as best you can in a hospital. And the call came in, and she said, the nurse said, there's somebody on the extended care unit who would like to pray. Will you come pray? I said, of course, of course. So I made my way in, and I stopped at the door, and I had a ritual before I went into every room. To myself, love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way. On the road from greed to giving, love will guide us through the hard night. I centered myself with that hymn, which is why I call it my favorite. I centered myself with that hymn and walked in, and there she was laying there, probably in her 90s. We chatted for a little bit. She told me what she was there for and how long she'd been there and what was coming next. And she told me about her strong Methodist upbringing, her father a pastor, but that he wouldn't mind if she prayed with a Unitarian. So we chatted for a bit, and then it was time to pray. And I asked her, what should we pray about? And I can't remember what she told me, but we sat and we held hands and we prayed. And I ended, amen. And I went to get up and go. I was done, and I couldn't move my feet. I couldn't move my hand. She kept holding it. It looks like she was falling asleep, and I sat there, trying to be very non-anxious, because I don't know what to do. I don't want her to feel that I'm anxious. So okay, we're going to just try to move. No, okay. And there I sat, and there I sat, and there I sat. After a little while, she let go of my hand. She looked at me and said, "Your hand is so warm. It feels so good." She rolled over and went to sleep, and I left her room. I did nothing. I did nothing in that moment. I sat with her, and I listened, and I don't know what you would call that. That was the first time I felt, in every inch, every piece of me felt that web, that connection, that thread that goes from me to you and you to me, and on and on and on. And I don't know what we call that thread. Maybe we call that thread love. Maybe we call that thread God. Maybe we call that thread unknowable. Maybe calling it the interdependent web is enough. I believe that's at my center. And I believe that when we look back, we see times when our threads maybe were knotted. Or maybe we see times where our thread, there's a lot of slack because we feel really far. We feel disconnected. And maybe there are times when that thread feels really tight because we're really caring for a lot of folks and we're not sure what to do. And we look back and we make meaning from those experiences. Each one of us making meaning. And maybe when we think about it, we get this glimpse into the tapestry eternal. Maybe, just maybe. I invite you to join me in just a moment of quiet. Amen and blessed be. I invite you to rise in body and spirit. It looks like our words are here. It's hymn 1008 in our teal hymn book, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. Thank you. You may be seated. We extinguish our chalice, but not the light of this community. That light cannot be extinguished, for it lives in each of us, reminding us that we are connected, held always in a larger love. Our worship is over, our service begins. May we leave with this prayer on our hearts. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. We are blessed with love and amazing grace. May we go forward with our hearts in that holy place. Go now in peace. Go now in peace and know that you are so loved.